Hello, it's Friday the 13th, and you're listening to the Saluki Gamescast. This is episode 90. My name is Justin Young. Joining me, as always, are Mario Sanders and Christina Ivey. How are you guys doing? Good.
Doing okay.
Yeah.
You sound super energetic and enthusiastic.
I think it's more than usual. Yeah. It's been an okay day. I've been like 72 hours without internet, and I got it back today. So.
I assume you mean at home.
Yes.
Not here in the office.
Yeah. It's been really weird, and I realized that I need new hobbies because so many of them depend on the internet.
Well, and too, like, I mean, even if you're like, well, I'll watch a movie, do you have many DVDs and everything sitting around? And even video games, like so many of my video games are, you know, in the cloud somewhere installed, until I download and install them. So I could play what games are currently installed on my computer or PlayStation, but not much else. And
I've just done a wipe through of like some of the games and stuff I did right before all of this. So I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. It's been okay. It's a eye-opening experience, but I got through it. Don't worry. I have internet now. It's fine.
So on my iPad, I've downloaded a few movies that I will not watch until one day the power goes out. And then I have something to do, something to watch.
What movies?
I don't even remember now. Like, I think like one of them is the original Alien, which I've seen before, but it's been years.
Yeah.
And so like, I was like, I'll rewatch that one. Like one of these days.
Fate will tell you when you will watch it.
Fate will tell me when it's dark and stormy outside and I'm sitting there watching like xenomorphs, like hunt Sigourney Weaver. That'll be like, luckily I do not get too scared. But that could be terrifying, I suppose. Mario, things going okay with you?
Yeah. It was a pretty good week. It was a long week. I was gone last weekend. Went out to Eugene to visit some friends. Boise State was playing Oregon for football, and so went out to see them. So it was a good weekend. We went and saw the Beetlejuice movie. But I think I'm kind of just ready for the week to be over.
Yeah, I saw the Beetlejuice movie. I think you and I talked about that for a few minutes, and we both liked it.
Yeah, I thought it was good.
Yeah.
I have a very low bar in terms of like standards for movies. I feel like it's kind of like
that's why you were the one of us who really loved Borderlands.
Loved it, favorite film. As long as I feel like I didn't waste my time, I'm usually gonna be like, yeah, it was pretty fine.
Yeah.
And I thought it was better than that. Beetlejuice, that is, not Borderlands. But
he's telling you how low Borderlands is.
I thought it was quite good. I think they do a good job of like having enough of an homage to like the original. Have it being nearly going on almost 40 years, 35 years since the original. I thought it was really good, very fun.
Nice.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. And Christine, you acted like you saw it?
I have not yet.
Oh, okay.
It was more of a, oh, yes, okay, good. I'm going to see it and it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
It sounds better than like, I watched a couple years ago the Hocus Pocus came out.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And I was super stoked about that because that's one of the movies that I still like every Halloween end up watching. And
that seems like a Christina movie.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll take that as the compliment that it is.
I'm just not at all surprised you like that movie.
Yeah. So I'm watching it with a couple of other people. Like we're watching it on that like where you can stream Netflix and like it times it all together. And there was one of us who had never seen Hocus Pocus before, which I was like, how are you in my friend group and you have never seen this film? And it was like too much of the homage where the three of us who had seen it were like, oh yeah, this was lovely. And then the one that hadn't was kind of
what's
lost.
going on?
On some of the stuff. Like, you know that they have to have a moment where they update a song, right? And that they perform a song. That was such an important part of the first film. They have to have it in the second. And when it came, it it was okay. It checked it off the list that I had in my head. And the person who hadn't seen it was like, why are they doing this? It makes no sense.
Right.
I'm like, well, watch the original.
I think that's always the trouble with like those legacy sequels. Like, because what is it that people really love about that film? And I think the like sort of paint by numbers idea is like, okay, well, it had this, it had this, it had this. So we've got to punch those into the film.
Yep.
So I saw that Alien Romulus, new Alien film. And so like it's half of a really good movie. And the second half falls into that, hey, remember this?
Yeah.
Like to the point where they use a line and it's the only line that you probably remember from the Alien films. And it doesn't even make any sense in context.
Gotcha.
When they use it. And you're like, oh, you just felt like you had to put that in the film. And like for anybody who's watching that film and has not seen those original movies, I can imagine them going, that was weird. Like, why would that character say that? That didn't make any sense.
Yeah. Hocus Pocus was like that, except it was more of like an 80-20, where 80 was the nostalgia factor and 20 was new good material.
Yeah, and I Beetlejuice does some of those callbacks and everything, but I think it does it in a way that you're not eye rolling too much when it does it.
Yeah. I was talking to the friend that I saw it with. I think both of us were like, I couldn't even tell you the last time I've seen Beetlejuice. Part of me feels like I couldn't even confidently say I've seen it all the way through. There are just certain films or certain segments of it that are so iconic that like I know I've seen enough of it because I remember these parts of the movie. But I mean, I feel like you could go in it with like a very hazy memory of the first one and still be like, yeah, this.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Yay.
Yeah, I think it's worth seeing.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll enjoy it.
Yay.
All right, let's jump into what we've been playing. Christina, why don't you lead us off? What have you been playing?
Yeah. So I have one that I've been playing and one that I've been watching a lot of. The one that I've been watching is The Casting of Frank Stone, the supermassive game that's in the world of Dead by Daylight. And one of the reasons I've been watching it as much as I have is because it is the first supermassive game that I feel every single decision impacts gameplay. Like there are so many alternative, not necessarily endings, but alternative ways to get to the endings.
Right.
And then, of course, the ending itself is really, really great. And it's one of those, speaking of what we were talking about, I was nervous that it would be one of those games that if you hadn't played Dead by Daylight, you would miss something. And they definitely have a lot of really great stuff that if you are a Dead by Daylight fan, you're going to go, oh, yeah. Especially like...
At the repair generator at some point?
Yeah, you actually do. I think it's twice you do. And I was like, I didn't think it would fit in. And honestly, it's like it barely fits. My suspended disbelief is, it's like, I'll allow it.
Right.
But like the little like items that you pick up along the way are based off of perks or based off of add-ons and stuff for the killers. But the story itself was really, really good, that I think that even if you're not a fan of Dead by Daylight, you could play or watch and still really enjoy it.
I didn't realize that was set in the Dead by Daylight universe. I feel like you've probably mentioned it before and maybe somewhere in my brain I knew that, but I did not realize that when you just said it right now.
It might have been weeks you two weren't here at the same time as well.
I mean, that's been a lot lately. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, Supermassive has gotten so good at making that type of game, right?
For sure.
Like, they're very good at...
They're like the people that make that game right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talking about them trying to, like, shoehorn in the elements. I feel like that's when we get film adaptations of video games where they try to shoehorn in, like, remember this thing you do during the video game?
Yeah.
Well, it has to be in the film. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense in a movie.
What I really like is like, so up until you play, you fix the generator. Well, with the generator, I've been watching various people play it because, of course, each person's going to approach it a little differently. And there's one person who was really funny that I was watching. They go to fix the generator. He's like, how does everyone know how to fix a generator? If this were to happen to me, I would be screwed.
Right.
But what's really cool is up until then, they have still a lot of checkpoints and a lot of like, quick time things that Supermassive is known for. And it uses the vocal track or not vocal, but like the audio track for Dead by Daylight. So it still makes the same little noise when you hit the skill check or the quick time event, whatever. So it also incorporates Dead by Daylight that way, which is really cool. Just because I really like all the music and all the sound effects in Dead by Daylight. I think that's something that adds to the game. So it's cool that was one of the ways that they chose to connect the two.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, we don't have this very often where somebody makes another game set in a franchise world that is, a different genre of game. I mean, there's the Steam World games where that's their whole gimmick is each game is a different genre. And like, I feel like Telltale did that some. So we had Tales of the Borderlands, right?
They did like a Game of Thrones and a Batman and a bunch of different ones.
But like, for specifically a video game, like let's take this one video game that's a first person shooter and then make it into sort of a visual novel type thing.
Yeah.
So I think this is really interesting because it does open up that world of Dead by Daylight. There's a certain group of people who are never going to play those games because they're not going to play the online, super competitive or
for sure
type game. But they will play one of these games because they're a Supermassive fan or at least a fan of that style of game.
Absolutely. And I think that this particular, like Dead by Daylight itself is really, is the perfect franchise to do that with because one of the reasons why people love the original game is because the lore is so in-depth and so massive. And it's really, every time a new character comes in, part of the fun is seeing how they fit into the story.
Right.
And so it's like, if Dead by Daylight itself like mentions lore, but it's mainly about gameplay, this one just goes really in-depth into the narrative aspect of it. In a way, again, that's really cool. Still leaves a lot of questions about like who the entity is and stuff, but in terms of like how the entity has sort of recruited certain people or who has worked with the timelines in such a way to create killers, things like that, that's what this game is. It's really cool.
All right.
And then the game I've been playing, not a lot here, I just, every once in a while I get a like poker itch. And so I found a poker game and I've just been playing that. It's like, I don't even remember the name of it.
Not Balatro?
Not Balatro. It's not enough for me. It's not pokery enough for me.
Let's be honest, there's not money involved.
Yeah, well, and even in this, like, I honestly, like, I've been to a few casinos. I hate them, at least in terms of like, I hate spending money. But like, I'll put a 20 in a, Texas Hold'em machine and play and drink free drinks. You know what I mean? So it's nice to like play and not involve money.
Right.
Honestly.
Sure.
So, but yeah, that's about it.
Do you know what game it is?
No, it's one that I honestly on PlayStation 5, I typed in poker and it was one of the first ones to come up. Okay. And it has like a play offline, like you can play with people online, but it has a play offline option, which is what I like to do. And like the particular table I've been playing, even though it's the beginner level table, I really like it because it's it essentially when you get the initial 2 cards that you get in Hold'em, it then gives you a percentage of like what are the odds that you'll win, and every time a new flop happens, it changes that. So it's been an interesting way to see like if my intuition of whether or not I would keep the cards actually pans out for me kind of thing.
Is it Poker Club?
No.
Well, it's one of those things that I imagine you could like
It was originally a PS4 game, I think.
learn hands and learn odds and all that kind of stuff to become like a higher level player.
Yes. And like I knew a lot of that. But I don't know, it just feels a little different. I don't know. Pure Hold'em is what it's called.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I really like it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like I didn't know how to play a lot of card games when I was a kid, and I would play like casino games, like either on the computer or on NES or something. And a lot of those taught me how to play those games, right? And like, before anyone is too concerned, like I am not a gambler.
Yeah, right.
Like probably because those games I always lost at. I was like, oh, okay, well, like I can't beat the computer. I'm not going to beat real people with the real odds. But like, you know, like learning how to play those games and learning like when you should hit and, you know, if you're playing poker or you're playing, you know, blackjack or something. I think there's like a real value there as a teaching tool.
For sure. Because, so much of the game is like you can, and especially with playing with a computer on the beginner table, like a card will flop and they'll all of a sudden raise their thing. And it's like, oh, they have to have an ace, right?
Yeah.
And so you need to know that in order to play like on a more tougher scale, because obviously people will bluff a lot more in real life, but you've got to be able to not only be able to check your odds, but also have a guess of like what the cards are, like what people have around you. So, yeah.
That would be great if like there was a way you could hook up a camera and they would use AI to like read you. And so they could tell you your tells.
Yeah.
They could be like, hey, Christina, you're like your left eye twitches every time you're bluffing.
I did find myself a couple of times. I was like, dude, if I was playing in real life, they would know. They would know. You know? But yeah, it's been fun.
All right, cool. Mario, how about you? What have you been playing?
I keep thinking, I've been thinking about it today, like, I feel like it's not a ton, which is not true. I just don't know if there's been a ton that I would talk about. I think the biggest game that I've played recently was A Link to the Past. Or like beating it for the first time all the way through. It's a game that I've played a number of times. I guess the first time I, again, could like confidently say that I beat it was as a randomizer, which a friend sort of walked me through because that was for an event. This was for a different event. But we played through it, and the goal was to do like 100% of, all of the heart pieces and all of the collectibles and all that sort of stuff. So I think he said that he included it in this to get me to play the randomizer more with him. He's like, well, now you know how to play it and you know where all the things are. And I'm like, sure, I guess. But I played that. That's a hard game. I think in terms of like when I compare it to, I guess, Ocarina of Time, which would be the Zelda game I have the most familiarity with. But A Link to the Past does not mess around. Those enemies hit hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think especially it's one of those games that's, pretty challenging the first time you're playing through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like just figuring out where to go and where everything is. Like, it's not as hand-holdy as like maybe some more modern Zelda games are.
Mm-hmm.
And I was using like the cape for most of those bosses, so there was no real challenge. You're, impervious to damage. It's a fun game. It's one of those things that we talked about it, I guess, a couple months ago at this point when, you had originally played Mini Shoot Adventures and then I had played Mini Shoot a few months later. But to see its influence, and it's a game that I'm surprised you don't see more clones of.
Yeah.
I think my friend made that exact comment when another friend was playing, Mini Shoot Adventure after I had recommended it to him, that more games should just copy A Link to the Past in the things that they do. And yeah, I'm surprised that you don't see more of them. And maybe there are, and maybe they're just not as good and don't get the same like recognition or haven't been spread as much. But I'm surprised that there aren't as many that kind of just blatantly do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, there were attempts, like there's Legend of Oasis on Sega Genesis, which is an attempt to make a Zelda-like. I just think like it was one of those games that is much more difficult to make than like it feels on the surface, which I think is part of what makes Mini Shoot Adventure so kind of amazing. Is like they do that really well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it. You're right. We talked about it that you're surprised you don't see it more because that's such a good formula. And it's sort of the Metroidvania formula. And like you have to go and beat this boss and you get this item so you can explore this other part of the world. But like we see it so much less than Metroidvanias.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I found surprising about A Link to the Past is how open it is. Like once you get to the Dark World, you can really do a lot of those dungeons in any order. Once you get the hammer, the world just kind of opens up to you, and you can go into basically not all of them, but you don't have to. There's not as compared to what I feel like for Ocarina of Time is very linear,
right?
In terms of you cannot get to the next dungeon until you beat the previous one. I was a little surprised because, I was using, because like I said, it was a 100%. So I was using a guide, and the friend whose event it was, he was like, what order does it tell you to do those in? And I said, this one, this one, this one. He's like, don't do that. Do this instead. He's like, it's going to be a little bit harder at the beginning, but it's going to make your life a lot easier to do these things first. And I said, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was one of the things that became a problem for the Zelda series is they became very linear with those later 3D games. And it wasn't until we got Breath of the Wild where, one of the things they said with that game was, hey, we're kind of going back to the original Legend of Zelda, which didn't make a whole lot of sense maybe at first. And then once you played the game, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Like you're just really dropping us here and saying, figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've played so much of Ocarina, but it's been a while since I've played any of Wind Waker, and that's not a game I've ever beaten before. And same thing with, I've beaten Twilight Princess, but it's been so long since I've played it that, part of me doesn't remember it, but I feel like, those games are probably, you go to place A and then place B and then place C, and you do kind of you are just kind of on rails as you go through it. So it was interesting to see how open it is, and he really likes the randomizer of A Link to the Past, and so I assume with it already being fairly open and needing less required items to get to certain places, that randomizer is kind of like wide open from the beginning, as compared to an Ocarina that you are still following some pretty clear logic of I've got these items, I can go to this place.
Right. Yeah. Anything else?
That's really all I would talk about.
Okay. So I've been playing two things. First, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. This is the 2D Metroidvania Prince of Persia game that came out earlier this year. So I'm still plugging away at that. I like that game the more I play it, which is always like a very good sign for me that like I'm not getting bored with it. It's constantly sort of giving me new interesting things to pursue within it. I think that game has a huge world. Like that's a lot bigger game than I was anticipating. Like I was thinking like maybe an 8-hour game, but like, no, this is going to be more like a 20-hour game. So it's a very, very big game. And I think really, at this point, I feel comfortable saying that game is worth your time if you like that style of game. Because I think it's a very, very good one of those. So the other thing I've been playing is Astrobot. So this is the brand new Astrobot game on PlayStation 5. Of course, they had the sort of technical showcase game that came pre-installed on every PlayStation 5. I guess still does come pre-installed on every PlayStation 5, which was Astro's Playroom. This is an entirely new game sort of built in the mold of that game. But it is like, I really like that original, the Astro's Playroom. I still think that's one of the best games on the PlayStation 5 as far as like first party original games that, you know, you can't play anywhere else. I think this is a huge step up from that.
I did watch like the very first couple of so I was watching somebody and their first video came up for it. Yeah, it looked really, really fun.
Yeah, so I think the things that really impressed me with that game is that I think Mario and I were talking about it earlier this week, and I kind of compared it to like Super Mario Odyssey, and that they are constantly introducing new gameplay mechanics, and those gameplay mechanics, like they'll introduce it and then they'll do a slight twist on it, and then a slight twist on it, and then a slight twist, and then they'll just kind of toss it aside and introduce a new gameplay mechanic. So in the way that Mario Odyssey, when you would, you know, take over a new enemy, you would be like, oh, how do I use this? You know, how do I use the T-Rex?
Right.
Like, what am I going to do with this character? It feels like it's constantly doing that sort of thing in the game, which is, you know, I feel like what you have to do to keep somebody interested in a, you know, 10+ hour platformer like that these days.
Yeah.
It is very much a love letter to PlayStation. So Astro's Playroom is sort of this love letter to PlayStation hardware. And, you know, it has all those high res images of the different hardware, and like not just the systems, but like the, you know, the iToy camera and like the memory cards and everything, where you're like, this is really cool. I have nostalgia for this piece of plastic. This one sort of takes a different track in that it's much more of a love letter to the games.
Yeah.
And sort of the entire oeuvre of like PlayStation over its history. And so not only are there the little characters still dressed up like different characters within the, you know, different Sony franchises over the years, but you also get these levels where the game sort of becomes a version of one of those classic games, and you are playing it like one of those classic games. So I don't want to spoil some of them because some of them are so like amazing and cool and like unexpected. Like they really kind of catch you off guard. Mario, I think you said you saw the one of, I'll spoil one, like God of War and, you know, stuff like that. But like they do some deep cuts in this game, things that I think probably the average person playing this game is going to go, what is that? I have no idea like what they're referencing. And, you know, like part of the joy of the game is like discovering those. And, you know, the more kind of experience you have with those, I think the better. But like also, I could see a lot of people playing this game and going, hey, well, that part was really fun. What is that game? I want to play that game.
Yeah.
And so I think it is such an amazing showpiece for Sony. And like when you think about, we'll talk about here in a few minutes with the news, you think about how horrible Concord went, to follow that up almost immediately with this game, like basically 2 weeks later with this game, and this game be the exact opposite, such a rousing success. This feels like a must buy for PlayStation 5 owners. Like this feels like, you know, the best thing that Sony has maybe made this entire console generation. You know, like I used to be at the point where I was like, maybe Astro's Playroom is the best game. And I really like Ratchet and Clank. And I, you know, some of their other stuff they've put out this console generation, but like this may be the best thing they've made this console generation. It's the best platformer probably outside of Nintendo that I've played in years. Like I don't know what else I would compare it to. Psychonauts maybe like is up there. That's a really good platformer. But you know, this is really kind of hitting at that Nintendo level quality that you would kind of expect. But it's also a little frustrating because like this, while I was playing it, I was also thinking, and I'm not through with it by any stretch, but I was also thinking like, we kind of got this in Subspace Emissary and what was that in Brawl, Super Smash Bros. Brawl?
Yeah.
We sort of got Nintendo making a step towards this, but Nintendo is so sort of fussy with their franchises. They would never do this game. But like, this is the game that lots of people, I think, want Nintendo to make.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you want the game that has Mario and Donkey Kong and Kirby and Samus and all those characters interacting with one another.
Yeah.
And so they sort of feels like they beat Nintendo to the punch for the first time, which is like, you know, good for Sony. They had to get something right eventually.
Honestly, yeah.
But yeah, like high praise for Astrobot. I think that's a fantastic game. I think most people would really enjoy it. If you like watch some gameplay and you think that looks like a U game, I think it very much is a U game. So, all right, let's move on to the news. So we finally got news of the PlayStation 5 Pro. It's been fully announced. It is coming out for $700. That $700 will buy you a purely digital system, no disk drive. You can buy the disk drive separately. It'll be an additional $80. So now you're up to $780. But it does come with a 45% boost in the GPU. Something that they are describing as 2 to 3 times ray tracing, which I don't know that's how ray tracing works, but that's how Sony is describing it. I guess like power of ray tracing that you get in it. It has a feature called PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, which is basically like DLSS that on NVIDIA's graphic cards. So basically it tries to take an image and upscale it using hardware to create a 4K image. So the idea being that they can, even if the hardware can't actually push out a 4K 60 frames per second image, that they can use this PlayStation Super Spectral Resolution to do that. And yeah, it's at the low price of $700.
I don't understand. I think it was it Mario. Were you the one that was like, I don't know who this is for?
I think Justin said that, but I think I felt the same way. It's just, that's so expensive. You're looking at, I mean, after tax and stuff, you're looking at like nearly, and I guess if you want the disc drive, like nearly $900.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely blowing past that $800 figure.
Yeah.
Which is probably why they're not including the disc drive.
It's just wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so they made the PlayStation 4 Pro, right? And that was sort of their mid-console generation refresh. And that system sold decently well. I think they sold like maybe something like 15 million of those or so. And so I know some analysts have got out there and said they expect them over the lifespan to sell 12 to 13 million of these Pro systems. So obviously they're not expecting it to be a huge seller. They're not expecting everyone to rush out and buy this. It is very much sort of a niche item. But like, I think part for me, like just looking at it is I don't see the benefit in the same way that the PlayStation 4 Pro made sense. The PlayStation 4's hardware was underpowered. So by late into that console generation, a lot of games were chugging on that hardware. So the PlayStation 4 Pro made sense because you could get a more steady frame rate. I'm not seeing that problem with PlayStation 5 hardware as much. I mean, maybe if you tried to put on all the bells and whistles, but like Astrobot looks amazing. Mm-hmm. It plays amazing. Like I have no real complaints about how that game looks. So selling me a PlayStation 5 Pro when you're putting out a game like that, like I sort of look at it and go, I don't know what benefit I'm getting from this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and what does the base PS5 sell for? $500?
Yeah.
A $200 increase, I think, is also just what was so surprising. At first, I mean, yeah, I don't really know what else to say aside from that, but I think the other end, maybe this is just me getting old, but the disk drive is a big deal, I think.
Yeah.
We talked about Astrobot, and that is like quickly shot up. That's probably the next game that I will end up buying.
Same.
But I have purposely not bought it yet because I want to get a physical copy of it.
Yeah.
I've gone to the store for other games and they don't have one, and I'm like, well, maybe I'll end up buying it. But like games not having a physical copy is like kind of a deterrent to me buying them, at least for a home console. If it's on Steam or something, and that's a different story, of course. But I'm waiting to go out to Target or something like that in order to be able to buy Astrobot. I could buy the digital copy. I could have bought it the last couple of days, but I think that's again for nearly $300 more to get the disc drive base PS5 is just kind of nuts to me.
Yeah, and that's been a common, like I was talking to somebody else that was thinking about getting a PS5, and they were like, I definitely am going to get the version that has the disc drive, because, that when it first came out, they had either the fully digital or whatever. Yeah, and she was like, I'm definitely getting the one with the disc drive, because I don't, she's a little older, and she was like, I don't trust them not to take my games or something like that. And it's true, like to a certain extent. What if like something changes in the company or whatever and that game's no longer available or something? I don't know.
Right.
But then I was also thinking, like, when I built my gaming computer, folks told me that like my the
video card.
Yes, should almost be double the CPU. And so if the PS
You mean the price?
Yes.
Yeah.
If the PS Spectral Super Resolution, if that's like their answer to that, then maybe that's why it costs so much. But still, at that point, I'm like, just a gaming PC, like, because honestly, like, $900 isn't far away from when I built my gaming PC.
Right.
So, I don't know. I don't know who this is for.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you start getting up to $800, right? Like, you start to get into that realm of like gaming PC. Mm-hmm. Like, you can get a decent gaming PC for $900. Mm-hmm. And so, like, spending a little bit more money and you get access to a lot more games.
Yep.
Probably makes sense to a lot of people.
You figure, sorry to cut you off, Justin. What are the PS5 games right now, the big ones that you couldn't play on PC? Astrobot and maybe Ragnarok?
No, that's out on...
Is Ragnarok on PC now?
Yeah, Spider-Man 2's not out yet.
Okay. But I guess that's sort of the other thing is I think that's kind of been a big criticism of the PS5 generally, is like people don't feel like there are a ton of games on it. But if you're spending that much, I think you might just be better off, unless you're really wanting to play something specific. But, PS5, Sony's now pushing a lot of those games to PC as well. So,
right.
Yeah, I kind of can't believe it. And maybe I also just think about it as, I don't know what, like, you look at something like the Wii or the Nintendo 64, what the price of those were when they came out, what they would be like with inflation.
Right.
But like those felt like that might be like your big thing you get on like Christmas or something like that. I don't know if like many families could just. I mean, like obviously there are families that can just drop $800, but like that's a significant ask of anybody, or not anybody, but most people.
Right.
Just dropping $800 on a new console.
Yeah, and I think that may be the thing, right? Like this is not for kids at Christmas.
Yeah.
This is for the enthusiast, essentially.
And maybe that's also, we should just sort of think that way as Sony has become more mature in like the games that it's released. I mean, Astro Bot is the exception, right? To like the games that Sony puts out and develops. But yeah, so I mean, maybe that's what it's like. This is a system for like adults to buy, you know, when they have like a real job and a salary.
They have a real job even more than what I have, because there's no way I could like, I don't know where I could like the gaming PC made sense to me because like I built it in 2020 and it is still, I mean, the video is good.
Right.
And plus I can use it for other things as well. Like it's also a functional computer.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it made sense to me. This, I don't know if I could justify it in my brain.
Yeah, so I have a little different experience in that I have the digital PS5. I do not have a disk drive on it because I buy most of my games digitally now for everything, whether it's computer or home console. And I spent $400 for that. So that was part of the motivation too. It was $100 cheaper to buy the digital than the one with the disk drive. Yeah. I knew I bought most of my games digitally, so why not just fully transition to that? Yeah. And so I spent $400. I bought that the year that the PlayStation, I didn't get right at launch, but the year, within that year that it came out. So we're like 4 years later now, and this system's selling for $300 more. Right. And that is the real equivalent. It's not the equivalent to the $500 system because like it's the equivalent to the $400 one because it doesn't have the disk drive. So it's $300 more, almost, you know, like
almost a new console, basically.
Yeah, almost double the price, right? Like we're getting close to that. And particularly, like you said, if you put the disk drive on there, then it is double the price. Like we're getting up to $800 or close to it. And yeah, like, I mean, you know, like people can spend their money however they want. Sure. If you have the money to spend on this, great. But like, I feel like you bring up a really good point, Christina, about gaming PCs, that for a lot of people, like a Steam Deck is cheaper than this, even the new OLED models, or, you know, even just going over to Best Buy and putting down $800 on a gaming PC, and a lot of people will get, it feels like they'll get more value out of that. Or save that $800. If you were going to buy an $800 PC, instead of buying this thing, put that money together. Now, $1,600, you can buy a really good gaming PC for that. So, yeah, I mean, it's just not something I think that's going to, and I think in their defense, PlayStation sort of knows it. It's not going to set the market on fire. Yeah. I think one of the more interesting arguments I've heard about this is that this really might be the beginning of, I think it was Patrick Klepek was talking about this on Threads, but like, is this the beginning of more iterative consoles? So like when Xbox announced this console generation and it was the Series S and X, that felt very much like, hey, in 4 years, we'll get a Series X, you know, whatever new model, the new Series X, right? Sort of the way that you get a new iPad and it doesn't have its own name. It's just the new iPad. Yeah. And people kind of scoffed at that, but like now we're getting a PlayStation that people might spend $700 on. When does the PlayStation 6 come out? And how much more powerful is a PlayStation 6 going to be than this Pro model?
And what's it going to cost?
Oh, right.
Well, that's the other thing. Is this all about setting us up and getting us comfortable with the idea that when the PlayStation 6 comes out and it's $600, well, that seems like a bargain next to this. Or if it's more powerful, it seems like a bargain because it's now $800. But like, hey, is it's only $100 more than the last generation's Pro model. Just the depressed looks around the room.
It's like, look, I am a teacher. Like, I want to still be able to play. Quit.
Well, I think that's a legitimate question, and that's kind of going back to what you were talking about, Mario, about the kid at Christmas who asked for the game system. Like, when I was a kid, I got my NES, Super NES, PlayStation were all Christmas presents, right? They were my big Christmas present. Yeah. I didn't get hardly anything else because those things were expensive at that time.
Yeah.
But like, I think about now, my nieces and nephews asking for a $700 console. Like, my siblings have bought them game consoles, but they would balk at that, I think.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where I wonder, I mean, if you're Nintendo, if you see that, you are still like on the cusp of putting out whatever this next console is, we assume within a year or so. I mean, are you just like, man, if you can put that priced at $400, like that's, if I'm a parent, yeah, I'm gonna buy that like 10 times out of 10.
Yeah.
And even if I know nothing about video games, you know, you know the name of Nintendo. I mean, certainly, but yeah, I mean, if you're getting whatever the next generation is, and so I wonder if like how Nintendo's going to be the next company to put out a new console, what the price is. I certainly don't expect it to be this. I mean, I feel like we saw a report that said something like, don't expect it to be less than, or don't expect it to be more than a certain price, or something like that. But I just, I feel like I remember, we're going to talk about the Dreamcast in a little bit, but I feel like that came out and that was super expensive. And, you know, one of the things that like killed it, I feel, was, or maybe it was a different console, but like the PlayStation coming out at like so much cheaper than whatever it was. Maybe I'm getting consoles mixed up, but you know, like that's, I think, going to be a big thing. I mean, I know the experience of playing a Switch to a PlayStation is dramatically different, but I will be interested to see what the Nintendo console comes in at as well. If Sony is setting a price point at $700 for a mid-console upgrade.
Well, and I think the other thing is they have not lowered the price of that original PlayStation 5. Like, they introduced that slim model and they were on sale. So I think you got yours less than $500, Christina, when it came out. But like, you know, like I think you're absolutely right about the Switch. The Switch 2 is not coming out for less than $400. Like, I mean, I'll put my stake in the ground right now. Like, that system does not sell for less than $400 because they're still selling the current Switch for $300. They're still selling the OLED Switch for $350. Why would they possibly sell that system for less than $400? Particularly when their only competition is like, hey, 500, 700, we can go higher. So, I mean, I think, yeah, people, like, they're going to look like the bargain. I mean, it may not be a bargain, but they're going to look comparatively like the bargain next to these other hardware on the shelf.
Well, that, or I guess the other one is, what is the Series S sell for? I feel like you can get that for like $200, $250 maybe.
I think its official price is $300,
Okay.
but yeah, you regularly see it on sale for $250 or below.
So again, you know, and again, that's a different thing, different conversation. I know that they're not the same thing, but yeah, I think as you're sort of getting at, is it setting the stage for looking at these other prices like, oh, that's a deal, when it's still $500 or even $450 or something like that.
Yeah, one of the specs I did not note about this is that it has a 2 terabyte hard drive in it versus the 1 terabyte that comes in the Slim. And one of the things that we should note is that Xbox is putting out a new Series X system with a 2 terabyte hard drive, and they're pricing it at $600. And that's all that's different about that, is it has a 2 terabyte hard drive. So like, then you start looking at this and you say, well, the PlayStation Pro is only $100 more, and it's actually more powerful. So like, why would I not spend the extra $100 and get that more powerful system? And that situation. But yeah, I mean, it seems sort of crazy, like from a historical perspective, right? Like it used to be game console prices went down over time.
Yeah.
And so you had people who were early adopters, paid full price, and then you had people who bought in at the first price drop, and then eventually, you know, like the original PlayStation got down to like $100. Mm-hmm. And at $100, it was one of those like, well, almost anyone can buy it at that price.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of games out there, and the games are used and cheap and everything. But like these, you know, we saw this with the last console generation. I have a friend who never bought a PlayStation 4, even though she wanted one, because she was like, well, I'm going to wait till they drop cheaper. And then they just never did.
Yep.
And now we're seeing that again. Like these systems aren't getting cheaper. They're getting more expensive. Like the new models that they're putting out aren't cheaper. They're more. You get a little bit more hard drive, a little bit more power, but like, you know, they're not bringing in those cheaper customers, which is, you know, has been beneficial to Nintendo. I think that's why you see a lot of people ending up with a Switch, because when they look around, that's the cheapest way, especially the Switch Lite, which is like $200.
Yeah. It feels like it's gonna hit a breaking point at some point. Like you are, and maybe that's what it is like you're, you know, sort of where is the line in the sand where people are not going to spend more than this, and so there's your cap. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other problems with this system, I watched the, like, I forgot what it was, like 12-minute video that they put out announcing it. And they put that video out on YouTube, and they were trying to show side-by-side images of, here's the Last of Us remake running on the regular PlayStation versus the PlayStation 5 Pro. And I could not see the difference in a lot of those comparisons, right? Like, so the whole issue is like, hey, it runs in 4K. Well, like, it's not streaming in 4K, and it's a low bit rate on YouTube. So like a lot of this just looks jumbled. So you can't even show off the difference to your customers about like why this is better.
Yeah, I saw people on Twitter talking about that. It's just like, hey, if it does something for you, great, but I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, you know, like, again, it's one of those things that you benefit from if you have the 65, 75-inch 4K television, which more people have 4K televisions, but not as many people have that, you know, big screen 4K television where they're really going to see the benefits. So, you know, I think that's an issue of diminishing returns in general about games, right? Mm-hmm. Like when they launched the PlayStation 5 on the box, it said it did 8K, and it's like, well, we've never gotten an 8K game, like, and nobody has an 8K television. Like,
right.
That's just something to put on the box. Uh-huh. All right. Well, let's move on. We've buried the PlayStation 5 Pro enough. But we're not done yet burying Sony. Because Concord came out. Did you miss it? Because it was only out for 13 days. They shut down Concord in less than 2 weeks. I think it was actually 13 days after that game came out. Sony announced, like, hey, we're shutting this game down. We're turning the servers off. This game is no longer going to function. It's an online-only game. So if you had a copy of it, that game no longer works. You can't boot into the game at all. So Sony, to their credit, did announce that they would give refunds. So if you bought the game digitally or bought it directly from them, you can get a refund. It was less clear if you bought it at like Walmart, if you can get a refund. They was kind of like, hey, you take that up with Walmart. So I don't know how that will work for players, but yeah, Concord came out. I think we talked about it on this podcast. At its height, it had like 700 players on Steam, which is not good for a brand new game. And then Sony pulled the plug. This is kind of unprecedented for like a big AAA first party game to get released and pulled that quickly.
Yeah.
Like it's not like it's the first online game to be shut down, but to be shut down 13 days after its release.
Yeah.
And this was the conversation we had with not just, and I mean, I don't know if Concord was like especially bad in any sort of meaningful way, or if it's just just not the game people want right now.
I will say from what I've read, people, or heard, people who played that game were like, yeah, it's perfectly competent. It's not like a atrociously bad train wreck of a game.
Yeah. I think, but this, what I mean by we talked about is just like, this was this games as a service model that Sony kind of not went all in on, but like really pushed a significant, like a lot of money into these games. I don't remember what the percentage was.
They supposedly had 12 of these games at one point in development.
I heard, percentages of like how much funding or how much sort of like, money was going to go into all of these games. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head if they've had other ones that have come before this one.
Helldivers.
And that was like a pretty huge success. So you're one for two, I guess.
Yeah, but then they've also canceled games because they had that Last of Us Factions game, and they canceled that. And then they have the Marathon game from Bungie. So that hasn't come out yet, but word is that game is in trouble. And then they have, what's the other game? Jade Raymond is working on.
Oh, Cash Money Bank Heist game.
Yeah, it has a dollar sign in the name.
Yeah.
Like freeloaders or something like that.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, so they've canceled some of those games in development. This one came out, it sort of feels like maybe they should have canceled it in development as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was skeptical when, I think all of us were a little skeptical when this was sort of the business path they chose. And I mean, for it to have what I imagine they consider to be one of their big ones get shut down after 2 weeks. I think we talked about it. It was like, you hope that like one of them or two of them hit. I don't know if this was viewed as the floor though. Even the worst of the worst, 2 weeks. And I don't know if that was thought that could happen.
Yeah, I think, when I look at it, I just think about Sony. Sony made a big bet on these games as services, and Helldivers worked, but Helldivers also feels like it's kind of already gone.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, I know there are still people playing. I know they're still developing, adding new content and that sort of thing. But like, it does not feel like that game is the next Destiny. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't played it in months. I don't know if any of the friends that I played it with have played it in months. It's one of those ones that like I would consider going back to, but like, I think to be completely honest, a big thing that would keep me from playing it again is I got to re-download it, and these downloads are so big that, and I know that that's a me problem, but
no, I think that's a legitimate issue for a lot of people.
Yeah, but I just they're so short-lived, and even when like I don't think you could describe Helldivers as anything other than a massive success, and that came out in what, January, February-ish, I want to say.
Early in the year.
6 months, 7 months later, I'm sure people are playing it, but you don't hear anything about it. But maybe, that's worth looking into, like, what the numbers of, like, players online looks like. But, yeah.
I know they've dropped off fairly dramatically, but, like, not completely, right? So, certainly not Concord level numbers.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, I think one of the issues with this is this game always felt very, and I don't mean this as a criticism of the developers, but it always felt sort of soulless. It felt like a game that was being made because they needed to make this type of game, rather than the people making the game had a real clear idea and vision, versus Helldivers. Helldivers is a sequel, right? It's Helldivers 2.
Yeah.
They made that first game, and it felt like that was the natural evolution. They weren't just making it to make a live service game. Like, they had a real vision for what they were trying to do. And, you know, when this game was announced, and I guess all summer as we've been talking about this game, I feel like the conversation has been, well, it just looks forgettable.
Yeah, I mean, from what I'm seeing right now, it says by current players, Helldivers has 22,000, which is still honestly really solid.
Yeah, it is.
But
it's not its height,
of course,
but like
that's expected. But so I mean, I didn't hear a ton of what you were just saying going into that, but it's as a like a vision that Helldivers had. There's like also clear growth in terms of like the way that they designed it from being what the first one was sort of like asymmetric top-down view to, the third-person shooter. So like they had a bit of a head start, whereas with a brand new franchise, you're trying to like break into this market. That's tough asking. And so I guess we'll see how Marathon does whenever that comes out.
Yeah, and I think, we kept talking about there are already so many games in this area. Mm-hmm. So, like, how do you distinguish yourself from an Overwatch 2? And they really seem to be trying to copy Overwatch in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And you have Marvel Rivals coming out. You have Deadlock coming out from Valve.
I've played a little bit of Deadlock, and people love that game. Yeah. That is going to be, I think, the next big one that companies are going to have to contend with.
But, there's still stuff out there like Apex Legends.
Oh, sure.
Which has fallen off dramatically, is my understanding. But, like, people are still playing that. And there's the finals.
Valorant, I think, is still about as popular as it's been. So there's so many of them. Yeah.
I mean, there's too many games to really have enough audience for those games. Like, some of these games are going to have to fail in a way that I feel like traditional single-player games, they may not have the big launch, but like people may eventually find them if they're really good. For a game like this, it has to succeed out of the block. And what we saw with this is what happens when they don't. Like, if you launch one of these games as a service, if it does not find an audience right away, there's just no reason to continue supporting it. Like, people aren't going to discover it 6 months from now, because 6 months from now, nobody else is going to be playing it. Mm-hmm. So, like, why would you start playing it at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested if there's a, like, back to the drawing board type of approach of, can we do anything to, like, go back to the development stage and then re-release it sometime in the future? I mean, I think that there's no reason why they couldn't do that. And I could almost understand why they might, just because, again, you've put so much money into it, but then you're putting more money into it as well. So, I mean, like, I could see that being the case, but, I also, if this is just like just have to take the L here. Yeah. And hopefully the next one goes better. If
that's a chance, they risk, like this already has been, like, a kind of face-destroying thing. So I wonder if going back to it and tweaking it and sending it back out would not really do anything to help that, if that makes sense, or...
Yeah, I guess my thought of them attempting that is you've seen success stories of other games that are not like shut down like this, but I think No Man's Sky was a disaster when that first came out, right? Yeah. And maybe that's also like the exception. Yeah. But like you've seen it in the past where like no, we're not gonna just immediately give up on this. So like maybe, but. That's, I think, a very optimistic view.
Yeah. There's a bit of a sunk cost fallacy, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Like, how do we salvage this money? Are we better off just cutting ties and saying, we can't?
Yeah.
This isn't salvageable. We should say, like, there's no joy in this. Like, there was people on social media celebrating this game failing. Like, there's no reason to celebrate a game failing. Like, people worked on this. For some people, this was their dream. Maybe this was their dream game, right? Like, they really sunk a lot of their soul into making this game. And so we kind of badmouth it, but, like, that's not to criticize the people responsible making it.
Did we talk about this 2 weeks ago? Is this the game people were celebrating failing because of wokeness?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like because of who I think the person is the lead developer of the game. Yeah. Like,
Yeah, and I think that's just such the unfortunate thing, right? As you think about the people at this studio who have worked so hard to make, as you said, what everybody seems to say, like a perfectly fine, very competently made game that just did not hit with people.
Yeah.
yeah, it would be a very different story, I think, if this game was just a complete wreck at launch.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Like if this game was bug riddled, and I'm sure it had bugs like all games
Sure.
do, but like had it just been a complete mess, like we would be having a very different conversation. And I think that's part of what makes this game so kind of mind blowing. The whole situation is like, this was not like some developer you've never heard of before putting out a game. This was Sony first party putting out a game, and the game like just crashed straight into a wall.
Part of me wonders how much the $40 price tag affected or influenced something like that. Again, when compared to Deadlock is free. Right. I mean, you have to get an invite at this point in time, but it's free. And it sounds like it will always be free. So,
but it'll have microtransactions,
Sure.
which this game did not.
yeah.
So that was part of the pitch. Like people have said, hey, we're tired of season passes and microtransactions. We want to just pay a price and play a game. Sony gave them that. It failed spectacularly, which probably means we won't get one of these again.
That's what I was going to say. I wonder if the next one is going to be, free or $10, $15, and, you can pay it. You don't have to do the microtransactions, but give us all your $3 payments if that's what you'd rather do.
Yeah, I don't imagine Marathon comes out at $40.
Yeah.
Let's see. Other bad news. Annapurna Interactive's entire staff has resigned. All of Annapurna Interactive quit, basically. This was apparently they were in negotiations with the head of Annapurna, which is Megan Ellison, which is Oracle, Larry Ellison's daughter. So he gave his kids both billions of dollars, which his son is now using to buy Paramount, and his daughter started up a film company / video game company, Annapurna. They make movies, they make video games, or have published video games at least, and have been extremely successful, publishing like much beloved games. One of my favorite games from the last few years, Stray, they were published.
Fantastic games.
And basically the staff of Annapurna Interactive was like, hey, we kind of want to just spin this off, right? Like this isn't working, and maybe we can spin this off and we'll just be our own separate company running ourselves. And so apparently those negotiations broke down, and when they broke down, the head of the studio resigned, and then everybody else resigned alongside him. So the controversy has been, well, what happens to the games that are still in development, waiting to be published, or even have been published already? And apparently they are trying to hire and staff up to manage those games. So those games will still get the service that they're expecting. But, that's a sad story because they have done so much good with the games and like really, trying to promote that idea of the AAA game, the indie game that's of a higher level quality. That's, it's sad to see that happen because they've been one of the best names in the business for that. Unity has canceled their runtime fees. They're raising other fees in response to that. But like this dates back to the story we covered months and months ago where Unity, I think it was actually last year when this all blew up, where Unity announced like, hey, however many times your game runs, like we're going to charge you like every time somebody downloads and installs the game. And people like lost their minds and were like, hey, we're going to stop developing using Unity. So they have backed off all that and said, our bad. like this was a bad idea, and we are going to instead raise like some of the licensing fees and stuff. But like we're not going to do this where we could potentially run you out of business and run you into millions of dollars of debt if your game is super successful and popular, which made absolutely no sense to anyone. Let's see. Flappy Bird is returning. Everybody's favorite tapping game on your mobile phone is getting a new release more than a decade after it was pulled from mobile stores. If you remember, that was a game developed by one person, I believe in Vietnam. And he put the game out. It was insanely popular, which was kind of weird at the time because it's not really a great game, but like I think it kind of went viral online with videos and people trying to up each other's scores. And then the developer said, you know, the stress of dealing with all of it was too much, and he pulled the game. Like at a time when he was, you know, capable of making millions off of that game. He pulled it from stores. So now there's a new development team that has gotten the license for it. They're putting out a whole new game. It looks greatly expanded with multiple different levels and stages and characters that you can play. Yeah, this will be interesting because I feel like that was a game that had its moment, and I don't know that people really care that much, other than maybe download it as an oddity and you know, try it out. I can't imagine that recapturing that moment.
Not to that same extent.
Like if it was, I'm not saying it's a bad game, but maybe if it was a better game, maybe.
Yeah.
But it was more of like a meme,
right?
With people playing it. So, and those things, they live and die very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I imagine it'll be very popular when it launches, and then people will very quickly forget it. Let's see.
Another bird news.
Yeah. Thank you for the transition there. In other bird news, Tony Hawk claims that he is talking to Activision again. Quote, something the fans will truly appreciate.
Yeah.
So... yeah, there's a lot of speculation. It is the, was it the 25th anniversary of the first Tony Hawk game? And so they actually, maybe it's the 30th anniversary, I forget at this point. But like they updated some images on the social media accounts, like announcing this. And people were like, what does this mean? What does this mean? Are they doing something with Tony Hawk again? And so, yeah, like, I mean, people don't know what this means, what they could be working on. Like, the sort of easy bet is that this means they did those amazing remakes of Tony Hawk 1 and 2. People at the time assumed that was going to lead into remakes of 3 and 4, and maybe Thug after that, Tony Hawk's Underground. That's probably the safe bet, that if they're doing anything, it is a further remake of 3 and 4.
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Even so, that is very exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Those are great games.
Yeah.
Amazing
absolutely.
games. So, yeah, there's something to be excited about because, man, that felt like it was no hope there for a while. Like after those games came out, they were so amazing to just see them like shut down that studio, or I guess they reassigned that studio to help with like the Diablo remakes, I think it was. It was so depressing at the time because you were like, man, somebody finally did one of these really well, and you like punish them. Let's see. In less happy news coming out of the Xbox world, Xbox has laid off another 650 staff. This was specifically from the game development side of Microsoft, so this is not over the entire company. They said that this is not leading to any team shutdowns or games getting canceled. So, like, it's not like they're going in and shutting down an entire team like they did with, like very, very recently with the what is that game?
Hi-Fi Rush?
Yeah, Hi-Fi Rush team where they went in and laid off.
Tokyo? That Tokyo Gameworks?
Yeah, I think that's right. Where they went in, well, anyways, they laid off that entire staff, right? Like, so that's not what this is, even though it's 650, which sounds like an awful lot and is. This seems like they're laying off maybe like some redundancies, maybe where some teams have kind of like slowed down. They finished a game and published it. Maybe they're laying off some of the Q&A people. But it does not seem like it's affecting any of the games they currently have in development or the teams themselves dramatically. But still, obviously, as always, our thoughts go out to those people who lost their jobs. It sucks no matter what, right? Steam Families is rolling out. This is the new Steam approach to sharing content. They've already had a version of this. This seems to be a more simplified, straightforward approach. So Steam Families will allow up to 5 people to share libraries, but only one can play a game at a time. So if you're playing Portal 2 and somebody else who's part of your family wants to play that, they would have to go buy a second copy of Portal 2 in order to play it at the same time. But they could just wait till you're done and then start it and play it. But I mean, this sounds so much better than what that has been for a very long time in the game industry.
Yeah.
And a very much more straightforward approach than I think what we get on consoles even.
For sure, yeah.
Let's see. The Sega Dreamcast has turned 25. So if you do not remember, the Sega Dreamcast was originally released on 9/9/99. It's like one of the easiest days, release days ever for a game console to remember. So 9/9/99, September 9th, 1999, they released the Dreamcast in the U.S. This is the 25th anniversary. Obviously, we just passed it this week. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. Did either of you have a Dreamcast ever?
No.
I do now, but yeah.
Yeah, I have an outsized love for that game console. I think that game console is really amazing. It was Sega's last game console that they ever made. It kind of was a disaster. That console lasted less than 2 years, at least from its U.S. launch. It was more like kind of 18 months or less that was actually on the market, and they were pushing it. But during that time, that console gave us a lot of innovations. It was the first game console to launch with a modem built in.
Oh, wow.
To it. So, I mean, the first console games I played online were the Sega Dreamcast. So I played, NFL 2K online on a dial-up modem. It was not a great experience, but, I was playing that game online, and, Choo Choo Rocket, I played that game online. And so it was doing that before anyone else did, certainly long before we get the Xbox 360, which I feel like popularized, playing games online.
Yeah.
The VMUs in that, which was a little second screen that you had in your controller. You look at that now and how similar that feels to something like the Wii U or, the Switch, this idea of playing a game on the screen, having a second screen to look at while you're doing that. It was really so much ahead of its time with a lot of that stuff. And it was sort of Sega at their craziest, where they were just making the weirdest, most bizarre games you can imagine.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I probably think about or appreciate most about it, is that they were willing to take risks on the games that they put out on it.
Yeah, I mean, when you look back, Electronic Arts was basically hey, we're not putting Madden on the system. So they made NFL 2K and NBA 2K, which are, eventually Electronic Arts had to buy the entire rights to the NFL to shut down NFL 2K because they were kind of eating their lunch. And obviously NBA 2K is the only NBA game really out there now these days and very dominant. But then, yeah, there were the arcade ports, things like Crazy Taxi. There were the kind of weird games, which was also, I guess, an arcade port, Super Monkey Ball that came out on that.
I think about Shenmue very much being what turned into the Yakuza games. I mean, a lot of that sort of design philosophy.
Or even, that was Grand Theft Auto before Grand Theft Auto 3.
Sure.
right? Like, things like Seaman, which are just like weird, bizarre creations. Like if you've never seen footage of Seaman, like go search it. Be careful how you search it. Search Seaman Dreamcast game, not Seaman as you're searching it. But like, that was a game where you had a microphone and you talked to a sort of a fish that would, grow and evolve. It was sort of like a Tamagotchi game, but, it would talk back to you, and it would make like, it would eventually like be able to talk to you in the voice of Leonard Nimoy. They were doing so much weird stuff at this time. Virtua Tennis is like a fantastic game on the Dreamcast, like probably the best tennis game ever made. And it was that diversity of games, right? Like we don't see that diversity of games anymore. It's the thing we complain about with both Xbox and PlayStation, that they make one type of game and they don't make this in an era where companies were just making all sorts of weird games. And so it feels like the end of an era to some degree. I mean, I think the PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360 carried that over to some degree, but they were never as bizarre and weird as Sega was with this system. So, yeah, I think it's a moment worth noting in history as we reach an anniversary for this system. Let's see. We do have a meeting we have to go to, so I am checking time here. The Minecraft movie got its first trailer. I don't know if you two had chance to see this trailer yet.
Oh, I did.
I did not.
You have not seen the Minecraft trailer?
No.
Okay.
I feel like I've heard
it's pretty epic. You should see it. You should. In the same way that you should go see Borderlands. No, I'm just kidding. It's a lot.
That's what I feel like I've heard, is that it's like wild.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know what I expected a Minecraft movie to look like.
Yeah.
But it wasn't this, or it was this.
And it's got a lot of like.
It's not animated, right?
No.
Well,
I mean,
semi.
They're like playing in the Minecraft world, but it's like, isn't it like Jason Momoa?
Yeah.
Jason Momoa
and
and Jack Black, and then this girl that was on. I just watched a series on Netflix called like Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and she was the lead actress on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a pretty a decently packed cast, but just them juxtaposed with like the Minecraft stuff. Is
it like, either of you ever see the South Park World of Warcraft episode? Is it like that? Like where it's just like gameplay that's being recorded?
No, I mean, it is. I think the best description of the Minecraft world is what world did the Sonic the Hedgehog original version live in?
Okay. I guess I just have to watch the trailer.
Yes.
Like it's sort of uncanny. Like here's a llama, and yeah, that's the llama from the game. But also, what is that thing?
Yes.
That thing is nightmare inducing.
Okay.
So yeah, and also like Jack Black, who I like. I know people have been mad at him this year, but online. But like Jack Black also feels like miscast in this film.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm seeing an image from the film.
Well,
from the trailer.
He keeps being in all the video games. I mean, he was Bowser, and then he was in Borderlands, and so they're just like, well, you should be in all the video games.
I guess I'll watch it and I'll have thoughts of it for next week.
And Jason Momoa. Why? Why?
Yeah, or Jason Momoa.
Yeah. And Jack Black just looks like Jack Black.
Yeah, he's just Jack Black with a blue T-shirt on.
Yeah.
It's like, I am Steve, but he also has his like bushy beard that he has now with like the gray in it and everything, which is like, that's not Steve.
Yeah.
It's old Steve.
It's old Steve.
Yeah. Which is like, is this going to be Jumanji?
What if it's like I was going Hook, and as the other no, he returns to the Minecraft world as an old man.
I mean,
if this film had the audacity of Hook, right? Like, I don't think this film has quite those lofty ideas. Say what you want about Hook, but that was a movie that was trying something.
I love that movie.
That feels like a classic. I don't know. Maybe it's one of those kids' movies that every adult is like, that movie's terrible. But
I think especially like kids who grew up with that movie love it quite a bit. Yeah. I think at the time that movie was, I think the problem was it was not maybe what people were expecting going in. And so it ended up being disappointing in a way that is probably not fair to the movie.
Yeah.
So I feel like, you get two different like, kind of stories about that. I think that's a much better film than Space Jam.
That was my comparison point. It's like Space Jam is the movie that like I love because I watched it a ton as a kid, but adults are like, that movie is terrible.
Right?
And I'm like, oh, fine.
I didn't know when I was in
Don't watch
third
Space
and
Jam,
fourth grade.
I mean, there are films like that. Like, you should never go back and rewatch like films you loved as a kid. Because like if you go back and rewatch them, you're like, oh, why did I like this?
I feel like if I went, I mean, maybe I'd be wrong, but I feel like if I went back and watched it, like, this is Space Jam. Somebody put the Quad City DJs
I was about to say, especially when the music comes on, there's something about that song.
I'm just saying, like
Lola Bunny.
My favorite thing was Lola Bunny in Space Jam 2 when people were mad that they like toned down her sexuality.
Well, I mean,
I was like, what are you people? What is wrong with you? like it's a cartoon rabbit.
That happens to be the sexual awakening of a generation.
that's what I was about to say.
Look, don't blame us for them making Lola Bunny so attractive.
Look, I grew up with Maid Marian and Robin Hood.
Oh, okay, fair.
So like I understand.
So add bigger boobies and some attitude, and that's how we feel about it.
I understand, but also I feel like adults getting upset about that is weird.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Yeah, but also.
This is like the weirdos.
You just wait for them to make a sequel to Robin Hood that, they ruin Maid Marian for you.
Maid Marian. I just what is the chicken's name? Mrs. the Cloud. Have you never seen Robin Hood?
I have, but it's also been a very long time.
Man, her little like friend, there was this chunky ass chicken that like that was one of my favorite characters in that show.
Well, especially like at the end when she's like in the fight and everything.
Yes, and she's like a football player.
Right. Yeah.
Anyways.
Now that's a great movie that holds up.
Of course it does.
That's the title of this podcast: The Sexualization of Lola Bunny. Kidding.
The desexualization.
That's actually like fantastic for our SEO. There would be all sorts of people very disappointed with this episode. Like, where is
30 seconds?
They get to this point in it, and we're like, gotcha.
Like, there are like lots of people who are still very bitter about the desexualization of Lola Bunny. Who are gonna watch this podcast and be like, "What? I wanted them to be mad at the DEI people for me. It's all their fault.
They made her woke, and now she's not sexy anymore."
Next thing you know, they're gonna give her facial hair.
Oh wait.
I feel like that's a joke you could lean into, like, because she's a rabbit.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Well, that's what I was thinking with the facial hair.
She definitely does have facial hair.
Well, that's what I was thinking when you said that. That's what I thought you meant. I was like, give her facial hair, and I was like, she already has it, bro. You ever made out with a bunny? I'm kidding.
I think we might just have to
let's move on.
let that one go.
Yeah, let it go. Let it go.
Look,
For the record, I have not made out with a bunny.
The opening of next week, Christina, there's going to be no cold open from just like, last week I stated that.
I just would like to take this time to apologize.
I just assumed this was like one of those like terms I didn't know. This is like a bear.
Alicia's rabbit, you know.
Oh, this is like a bear. It's like a gay term.
Yeah, like it just means a bunny. Like, you know what a bunny is? And I was like, no, I don't. I also don't want to admit that I don't know what it is. Just because I'm afraid what the answer might be.
Keep talking about it. I'll get context clues. Okay, let's move on though.
That does remind me, like the original Inside Out has like one of my favorite jokes of all time, where the personalities in her head are talking, and they're like, "What have you never seen?" I forgot what it is, like a horse in San Francisco, and Anger goes, "No, but I saw a bear once." And like, I think that's such a fantastic joke because it completely goes over little kids' heads.
That's why I watch those kinds of movies, because those jokes are like, I love them.
Yeah. All right. Now that we have been completely sidetracked and everything, I did not see that going from the Minecraft movie.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and wrap this up, because we still have our big question to go to. So it is Friday the 13th. So pour one out for Jason. We had our big question for this week is, you're being chased through the woods by a video game character trying to kill you. Who would be your worst nightmare in that scenario? So what would be your worst nightmare of a video game character chasing you through the woods trying to kill you? Mario, why don't we start with you?
So for me, it would be one of the enemies from the Ocarina of Time. Well, really all of the Zelda games, but I specifically think of the Ocarina of Time iteration of the like, which is like, I don't even know how to describe it. It just is like circular sort of, or round, and it just like sucks you in. It's very scary. Although when I first mentioned it, Justin, you also brought up the Wall Master, which is like the hands, would also be terrifying. So one of those two.
Yeah, I remember there were several enemies in that game, maybe because it was like one of the first sort of 3D adventure games that I remember there being several enemies in that game where I was like, oh man, that kind of like scares me or creeps me out when I'm playing.
Yeah.
Which is not like necessarily a vibe I always get out of Zelda games.
It's like a worm, like, right? Is that what y'all were talking about? It like is kind of wobbly.
Yeah.
And it like falls down and like, yeah.
Yeah. Kind of like a fluke worm.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Christina, how about you?
I was trying to figure out whether to go serious or sarcastic with this. I went serious because I remember the very first time I watched my uncle play Resident Evil, the part where you walk up on the zombie, the first time you see a zombie and it like turns its head, even though the graphics were horrid.
It's been chewing on someone.
Yes, it's scary. Like I peed a little. Like it was bad. And I was like, well, I mean, but if it's chasing it, they're notoriously like the slow zombies. And I'm like, well, girl, you can't run. So it's like not a big deal. And then I was like, but then anything honestly in Silent Hill, the body horror that's in that game is absolutely terrifying. And I think, yeah, that would, any of that zombie would be my worst nightmare.
Pyramid Head or the nurses.
Oh my God, the nurses.
Like one of the things I think why that game has stayed so popular over the years is just the design. That game has really sort of iconic designs.
For sure.
You know, it doesn't feel like the generic enemies that you just plow through. Like those characters kind of linger in your mind long after you played those games.
Yep.
Yeah, so I went from something a little bit earlier, the Clock Tower series of games. So like I became familiar with these games during the PlayStation era, but they date back to the Super Nintendo era. And I think they're putting out like a remaster of the Super Nintendo games. But the Clock Tower games specifically because of the enemy in it who is named Scissor Man. He carries these like giant scissors that look more like hedge clippers, and he's chasing you throughout the entire game. And you can like hide from him, but if he ever catches up to you, he chops your head off with them. And I just remember playing that game on the PlayStation and being like, okay, I've never played anything like this. And, that was like, I guess, right before Resident Evil, which sort of stepped that up even more, right? So we didn't really have, there was Alone in the Dark and some stuff like that, but we didn't really have horror games at that level at that point. And then the other one we talked about before we went on the air was Jason and the original Friday the 13th on the NES. And you go back and play that now, it's not really that scary, but when you're a little kid playing that for the first time and you've never seen a horror game, the fact that Jason just like shows up randomly and attacks you and it's completely overpowering over you was really kind of terrifying, because you're like, oh man, if I get killed here, that's the end of the game. And there just weren't games like that at that point. So, so we're all a bunch of chickens scared of video game characters and everything. But yeah, it's a good discussion for Friday the 13th. It's always fun to talk about some scary stuff. That does it for this week's episode. We have to get out of here because we have some meetings to go to. But as always, thank you, Mario. Thank you, Christina, for joining me. Thank you to our listeners. You can check out more of our content at salukigames.com. And also you can email us at justin.young@siu.edu. If you have a suggestion for the big question, or you just want to give us your feedback, if you want to tell us about your weird ideas about Lola Bunny, I will forward
that question. But I think is probably better than the direction I thought you were going.
I will forward those directly to Mario because he is very excited to hear what other people think of Lola.
You're gonna get some fan fiction in your email. Just warning.
Look, Alicia can probably find it for you.
Fair.
Very good at that. But yeah, if you want to contact us, email us. You can also do that through the website. But thank you for listening. And in the meantime, go out, play something fun, play something a little scary to celebrate Friday the 13th. And we will be back soon with another episode.